When you first start your photography journey, there is a lot to learn. During that time, rules are helping you with the image structure, and that's the phase that we need them a lot. But after you're good with the basics and have that foundation, it is time to move on. The rules are very good in explaining photography, but not necessarily at creating it. And it is very often that photograph that goes against the rules becomes more noticeable simply because it feels different and out of the ordinary. So today, we're going to approach photography from a different, non-rule-based angle. Most compositional rules are invented around visual comfort. When you're looking at a photograph and it feels comfortable to you, it means that it's most likely following the rules. And if you start drawing some lines, you will see that the photography is often falling into the rule of thirds. If we look at this photograph with the man holding the umbrella, we would feel that everything is in the right place. And when I draw some lines, it will be confirmed he is on the rule of thirds. But does it mean if you look at another photograph, there will be a feeling of discomfort? Not necessarily. To get that feeling of discomfort, you need to have something seriously off in the photograph. If it feels wrong, it means that the photograph is challenging your visual perception. Let's do a small test. You see this guy standing on these rocks? How does he feel? Is it comfortable? You would probably say, yeah, it feels absolutely fine. But now let's look at this photograph of that girl sitting under these religious paintings. How that one feels to you? I bet it's not as comfortable anymore, but I would like to hear how you feel in the comments. And do you know why do they feel so different? Let's try and break it down. The first photograph is very much aligned with the natural way of things. There is a dark ground on the bottom and sky on the top. The frame proportions are correct and therefore the image feels balanced. That guy feels incredibly stable and grounded standing on that rock. It feels like nothing can move him. But the second photograph challenged that common perception. Here we have a big chunk of dark tonalities above our subject that pushes the attention down like a rock. It gives that feeling that the mountain of darkness is about to crush the poor girl. It is because we're not used to have dark and heavy objects on top of brighter ones. That just feels unnatural. And that is why we feel that way. You're probably asking now, what kind of rule is that? Well, it's not one that you learn with the basic, but it's one that matters a lot. It's about visual weight and how it affects perception. And mostly how you feel when you're looking at a photograph. We are not going to do a class about visual weight right now. I showed you these photographs just to illustrate to you how we can use composition to project a certain feeling into our work. I discussed this and many other subjects more extensively in my compositional classes, which you can check in the description below. But now you will ask, well, if I'm not using the rule of thirds, how do I distribute the objects throughout the frame? What is this other way you were talking about? First of all, there is nothing wrong with using the rule of thirds. Sometimes this is the way. But I always look at the scene and decide how to work with it regardless of the rule. My suggestion to you is that instead of composing for the rule of thirds, compose for what matters, compose for what is important to you, compose for what you want to show. One of the highest currencies in photography is attention. Attention and emotion. What I'm looking at and what do I feel looking at it. And that makes the framework fairly simple. You find something that you want to photograph and you build your frame around it. You decide where to place it and what to include and what to exclude. And you're making this decision based on how you want the photograph to look and feel. What kind of message that photograph carries. The moment you turn on that inclusion and exclusion thinking process, you start composing consciously. Not just responding to what you see, but making active decisions about how your final image will look like. The moment you start taking decisions, you're creating your own composition, following your logic and artistic vision. Sometimes this might fall into the rules and sometimes not. Remember that the rules, they can help you with balancing subjects across your frame and set up placements, but not with creativity and not how the image feels. What you want to show is always more important than the rule. Let's look at this photograph, for example. It's a very basic one. I composed for the guy getting out of the water and framed him in such a way that the sky is completely out of the frame. I could include third of the sky, but why? What would that sky add to the photograph? Similarly, I could line all the swimmers in the river on the third line, but why? Having them a bit higher than the line of thirds, I create this attention vacuum that pushes the attention down to my main subject that I actually want to highlight and show. Let's look at another photograph. We have a guy facing the camera and there is a woman sitting a little bit deeper. They are not placed on the center of the frame, nor on the thirds. I'm not using a diagonal and yet the image still works. I would like to hear your thoughts. Why do you think this image works? Or does it work at all? Okay, but let's try and break it down. The man is placed in the foreground. He is seated outside, while the woman is deeper in the frame, seated inside of the archways. This creates a bit of depth and draws the viewer eye into the scene. And the composition is balanced through the use of implied symmetry. The two arched doorways provide a visual anchor, and while the man isn't exactly in the center of the frame, he is centrally placed in the lower part of the image, holding a very dominant position. And the woman's quiet presence tells a story. The subjects are placed close to each other, but off balance, and that creates tension and help with the storytelling. Two individuals in quiet proximity, separated by architecture but connected by context. There is a sense of proximity and distance at the same time. And that evokes curiosity. What is their relationship? Why are they there? Are they related? Or did they randomly get into the same frame? This shot would feel absolutely differently if they were equally spaced on the thirds. This lack of symmetry and their positioning applies not only to the physical distance, but also the social distance between them. By listening to this breakdown, you might be sitting already and thinking, this compositional thing is too complicated. But the truth is that I didn't think about the scene in the same way while I was photographing it. I just saw something, I saw that contrast between two of them, and I wanted to show it. I wanted to show what I felt. So I composed for the subject without the rules in mind. Later on, when looking at it, it just looked fine. But at the moment of photography, I just wanted to show that closeness and distance in the same time. That was my goal. Let's take another example. On this photograph, I have a performance artist looking at her reflection in the mirror. Basically, all the story of the image is happening in the center of the frame. I could place the person and their reflection on the thirds, which would create better separation between them, but that proximity, that closeness to each other, it serves me like a dialogue between two close friends. You need to understand that the space and distance in the image also create emotional distance. If I would put them in the thirds, it would create a more distant feeling. It might make the image more balanced, but they would feel more far away. I did wanted that intimacy. The dark areas around are also pushing the attention towards the center. And the frame of the mirror helped directing the attention into the right spot. Let's look at another photograph. This time, it's a photograph of a fisherman that is cleaning his basket with fish in the ocean. And there is a pack of birds around him, waiting to get some leftovers. Neither he is placed in the intersection of the thirds, neither the skyline. The only reason that I have included that much of sky is because I wanted to give some sort of ending to the story and not just have a one-tonality ocean backdrop behind him. The image still works because of the way the birds are framing him and driving that attention to him. Again, the composition here is for the subject, for the story, and not for the rule. Working that way will open many creative doors for you. So don't hesitate to try it. But how do we do it in practice? How do we frame for the subject? First, we identify what we want to photograph, and we build a composition around it. Remember that if it's a single subject and your frame is horizontal, you will have a lot of space on the both sides of the image. Be mindful of that. You would usually want to fill this with something. Try to maintain balance and have some objects of interest distributed throughout the whole frame. These objects shouldn't compete with your image. They should work as framing, as something that is pushing the attention towards your main subject or interest. Another option is to use these extra elements as context. Use them as tools to tell your story. Just like in the last photograph with the fisherman in the water, without the context of the birds, that would be a completely different photograph. And again, if we work with a scene where there are many objects that we want to photograph together, try to have them spread throughout the image in such a way that the attention is jumping from one to another in a sequenced way. With many objects, there are so many compositional choices that you need to do. In some cases, you will have all of them carrying the same importance in terms of narrative. Like in this photo with the monks cleaning the stupa. Everyone is the same size and no one is taking over the most important role. But in others, you might want to choose one of these characters as the most important one and have the rest support him in his narrative. That hierarchy helps you with the task of distributing the attention between the participants of the composition. It can be done in many different ways, and I have a video about composing with this hero's mindset. It explains exactly how to compose that way. You might want to check it out if you want to extend on the subject. I will list it in the description of the video. And when you're composing with multiple objects, try as much as possible to avoid overlapping. At the moment your subject overlap, they're perceived as a single object. And that can affect balance and make the photograph hard to read. I think that the hardest part to master in composition is balance and directing the attention. For that one, you will just have to go through a lot of photographs, a lot of compositional decisions, and develop your visual literacy until you can simply see it intuitively. But mostly, I suggest you to try not to overcomplex the composition with too many elements. When we have some experience and we're working with wide framing, there is this tendency to include more elements and more context, but often simplicity is the key for better composition. There is no need to throw so many elements on the viewer if there is no actual reason to do so. Frame your subjects, add the necessary context, but everything else that doesn't serve the narrative is a distraction and should be taken out of the framing. And of course, you can definitely use symmetry, diagonals, and the rule of thirds to your aid if you're stuck and can't figure out the composition. But do attempt to compose for the subject. That will become easier and easier with time. One day, you will compose from your gut and know exactly how you want to present the scene at the moment. There will be no rules needed for you to do so. I hope that the technique of composing for the subject will help you on your journey. Give me a like if you enjoyed that video and see you later. Happy shooting!